but it sounds like a very European name. Along with his son, Grace selected his Chinese name, Li Chun Fan. Li was the family surname. Chun was part of Hui Chun's father's name, Li Chun Biao, and meant shake up, rouse, or excite. And Fan is the Chinese character for San Francisco. So Bruce Lee's Chinese name meant shake up and excite San Francisco. Wow, amazing. Here's some more information here. How Li Hui Chun came to America to raise funds from the overseas community to support the war effort back home. And there's some information on Bruce Lee. There's a baby. And some information on World War II, etc., and how some people were killed, etc., etc., where they were living. Okay. Li Hui Chun was the only breadwinner for a household of 13 people. Oh my gosh. Bruce used to shake his fist at the Japanese planes flying over. That's in his young days in his movie roles. Okay, the illness and frailty that haunted Bruce during the occupation, the Japanese, lost its grip after the liberation. He became so hyperactive his family nicknamed him Never Sit Still. He was forever jumping, talking, playing or moving. Peter, his brother, remembers that if Bruce was ever quiet for a long period, his mother thought he must be sick. He almost had a disorder which filled him up with too much extra energy, like a wild horse that had been tied up, says Robert. When he wasn't knocking over furniture in a whirlwind of chaos, Bruce was questioning everything his parents told him to do, earning him yet another nickname. Why, baby? Why? Question mark, baby, right? A sceptical attitude towards authority lasted his entire life. The director of The Big Boss 1971 called Bruce in exasperation the Y Dragon. His parents discovered the only way to calm Bruce down, his off switch, was to hand him a comic book. He would read quietly for hours. Prior to the advent of television in Hong Kong in 1957, comic books and magazines like The Children's Paradise were a major form of entertainment. Bruce started with Kung Fu comic books and graduated to sword and sorcery, martial arts, and Chinese wuxia, novels, etc., etc. All of those comic books and fantasy novels created a rich inner life. As he read, Bruce imagined himself as the story's hero. Yeah, we read about that. A certain comic, and it all played out in his favour, according to that comic book, apparently. Once Grace rebuked their son for acting selfishly. You are really no use, child. You seem to hardly have any soft spot for your own family. To defend himself, Bruce told a story. If we were ever walking in the forest and came across a tiger, I'd stay and fight the tiger and let the rest of you escape. Okay, more information. As part of the nascent movie industry, Li Hui Chun, Bruce's father, was friendly with all the major players, often inviting them over to his home. He also brought his children on set with him. None of them took to the jungle gym like backlots with as much excitement as Never Sit Still or Bruce. Bruce climbed the wooden ladders to reach the suspended studio lights. They say they were afraid he would lose his grip. He wanted to touch everything, from the cameras to the sound equipment, remembers one of the actresses, Feng So Po. He was so naughty they taught him hand games to distract him. When Bruce was 6 years old, the director of his father's latest film saw him on set and was so impressed that he offered him a part. At first, both Bruce and his father thought he was joking. Bruce was wide-eyed, open-mouthed and delirious, happy, says his mother Grace. He played a part of a pickpocket, etc., etc. Goes quite deep. For Bruce Lee fans, the movie that he was in, My Son Ah Chang, I think it is. For Bruce Lee fans, the movie is most notable for the new screen name given to the lead actor. Previously known as Little Hui Chun, the film's opening credits list him as Li Long, or Dragon Lee. Given his pint-sized stature, this was quickly converted to Li Xiaolong, or Little Dragon Lee. Bruce loved his new screen name so much he insisted on using it in his private life. From then on, all his friends called him Little Dragon Lee, many of them having no idea that his birth name was Lee Chun Fan. If names have a magical power, this film marked the moment when Bruce Chun Fan, Little Dragon Lee's before personal life and movie persona began to merge, overlap and bleed into each other. Wow. While Bruce stated or defended himself against insults, he quickly acquired a taste for combat and was soon instigating fights himself. His reputation shifted from someone you didn't want to mess with to the boy it was best to avoid. Parents began warning their sons to stay away from him because he probably beat them up. Pretty aggressive. Because he was smaller and weaker than all the other boys, right? He was never able, because of his illness, he was never able to learn how to ride a bike. He was also terrified of the water. Bruce was already quite mischievous. His sister sought to teach him a lesson by holding him underwater at the Lai Chi Kok amusement park swimming pool or pavilion and not letting him come back up, says Robert. It scared him so badly he never dared to swim again. Severely nearsighted, Bruce wore thick horn-rimmed glasses or Coca-Cola glasses, and his ear was pierced to protect him from boy-stealing snake demons. He even wore an earring to school, inviting much teasing from his classmates, says Robert. Most scrawny, four-eyed boys would have hidden in the corner, downcast, lost in fantasy, but not Bruce. Just like his character in My Son Archang, he was pugnacious and short-tempered. Anyone who teased him or made him lose face, he fought right there, then, and right there. Right, you give it a go. Right. And more information. He hated school, fidgeting, he got terrible grades, that sort of stuff. Lots more information on him. Go through it pretty fast. So he goes to, following in the footsteps of his older brother, 10-year-old Bruce entered La Salle in September 1951 as a 5th grader, run by the Catholic Lassallian Brothers. La Salle, located at the time on Perth Street, was one of the most prestigious secondary schools in Hong Kong. Okay, so most of its students were upper and middle class Chinese and Eurasians, although there was a number of scholarship students. Okay, curriculum taught in English, producing bilingual graduates. Decent job, it's guaranteed decent job in the British colony, joined the police, the bank, the civil service, etc, etc. And Bruce Lee excelled in English. So they probably taught him the Summa Theologia, etc, etc, Roman Catholic stuff, and that's why he read it and knew it later on in life. And that. Bruce hated losing so much he refused to admit defeat. When he lost, we'd ask him how it happened, says Michael Lai, and he'd always come up with excuses for himself because he was like the boss of everyone and needed to win. Bruce's chief rival was David Lee, a tough boy with whom most people didn't mess. They battled several times. In the last contest it got heated and both Bruce and David pulled out their switchblades. The fight was stopped after Bruce lightly cut David's arm, drawing first blood. The injury wasn't serious, but neither boy wanted to take the enmity any further, the hatred. The use of weapons, instead of just fists and feet, shocked the more timid sensibilities of their middle-class La Salle classmates. Only the most rebellious teddy boys, like Bruce and David, carried weapons on their persons to school. Bruce owned a switchblade, brass knuckles and other improvised devices. In school, their favourite weapon was bathroom chains and used to flush toilets. Yeah, remember those old toilets. Bruce explained, those days kids improvised all kinds of weapons, even shoes with razors. Oh my gosh. With the gang life obsessions, the La Salle boys were in the middle class way, imitating their elders. The triads, Chinese mafia, had been operating in the colony since the beginning of the opium trade, but the influence didn't take off until after Mao Zedong's victory in 1941, etc, etc. These influx of hundreds of thousands of desperate Chinese refugees, including ex-soldiers and triad members, proved a volatile mix, spreading corruption and violence across the Kowloon side of the colony. Okay, we're going to go through this book pretty quick because we're looking for a certain topic. A man starts learning Wing Chun Kung Fu. This must be Wing Chun. Who introduced him to Yip Man, and then he accepted a 15-year-old movie actor as a disciple and then sent him to learn the basics from Wong Chun Lung. We saw in a movie recently that fake Bruce Lee guy, right? Bruce Lee or something, and he actually went to this old studio, this old Kun, and it was titled Wong Chun Lung, right? And maybe that guy that was the instructor there was actually that guy. Yeah, it just seemed really weird like that. The actual actor, he was playing a part in that movie, sort of that. Might have been Bruce Lee's fingers or something like that. He was looking for this finger technique, lost finger technique book or something. Yeah, something like that. Pretty sure it was that movie. Okay. So it goes on about him meeting William Shung, becoming great friends, learning from him, etc. etc. Unable to expel him, his Wing Chun seniors knocked Bruce around during class. These guys, some of them assistant instructors, gave him a hard time when he first studied Wing Chun because he was a skinny kid of 15. But yeah, because they didn't really want him there because he was an impure Chinese. We can't teach Chinese Kung Fu, they said, to an impure Chinese. We can't teach Chinese Kung Fu to an impure Chinese, claims William Shung. Bruce didn't belong to Caucasians or Chinese. He was in between and he was mixed blood. At that time, many Chinese people didn't accept someone like that. Ip Man refused to expel Bruce, but the little dragon was encouraged to study exclusively with Wong Chun Lung and avoided the main class until things settled down. This is the rooftop battle that Bruce had. Bruce Lee gave him a hiding. This guy, right, on the rooftop. Buoyed by his triumph, Bruce's confidence and fighting spirit increased. He became even more obsessed with Wing Chun. The contest taught him, on the rooftop, that success does not come naturally. One had to train and fight, says Wong Chun Lung. Every day he practiced boxing, side kicks, wooden dummy and so on. When he had finished with all this, he would sit down and meditate on what he had done. He trained himself in this way for a long time. And then he did his boxing stunt at school. And that Wong Chun Lung says he attacked Bruce's weak points and guided him to make full use of his strong points, says Wong. There's a lot of good information here on Bruce's cha-cha dancing. Margaret Lung and Bruce practiced the cha-cha around 1957. I wonder if that's Wong Chun Lung's daughter. Yeah, here's Bruce Lee in a refined gentleman role in a film. Yeah, watch bits and pieces of that. Okay, Banished. Yeah, first girl in Bruce's life was Margaret Lung. She was also a child actor, screen name Man Lan, from a prominent film family. Their mothers introduced the two of them when she was 11 and Bruce was 13. By all accounts, their relationship was purely platonic. She was more of a gal pal than a girlfriend. Adolescent Bruce was actually very prone to feel shy in front of young women, says Robert. Bruce's favourite thing to do in front of them ladies was show off his muscles. Yeah, that's what he did in his older life, right? His adult life. He liked to ask them to try to use their fingernails to try to pinch up a bit of fat, and when they couldn't, he'd laugh proudly. Margaret, like Bruce, had a rebellious streak, and she was also a bit of a tomboy. Bruce would often tease her by saying, if she didn't wear a skirt and have a figure, I'd surely treat her as my sworn brother. As they got older, they would go out to the nightclubs for dinner and dancing. We used to go out dancing at Hotel Carlton, the Shetton Inn, and the Champagne nightclub, just opposite the Miramar Hotel. Margaret says, the one with more money would pay more, but we always shared the bill. In the mid-1950s, Hong Kong's kids were jitterbugging to clean-cut American pop like Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock. Anders Nelson, a musician who had a part in Way of the Dragon, says the scene was more Pat Boone than Little Richard. It wasn't until 1957 that Elvis Presley rolled up on Hong Kong shores and teens like Bruce began greasing back their hair and gyrating in their blue suede shoes. Yeah, this Anders Nelson guy, according to an article we read on Bruce Lee playing around, having secret loves, all that sort of stuff, he makes some information, right? Gives some information. And he goes on about Bruce and Margaret hanging out. Margaret was not only his dance partner, but also his getaway driver. I was his saviour, she says. Every time he engaged in a fight, I was always somewhere nearby waiting in my car with the engine running. He would jump in and I'd floor it. While Bruce and Margaret were palling around like buddies, Bruce took a romantic interest in another woman, Amy Chan, who would later become famous in Asia by a film named Park Yan. I wonder if she's related to Jackie Chan. Who knows? Neither of us had much money to spend, so we went to Kowloon Dong, near where the MTR station is today. Amy says, the gardens over there had trees. We would shake the trees to make the flowers fall, yellow and white like sandalwood flowers. On the weekends they often joined a larger group, friends for tea dance, etc, etc. Amy remembers that Bruce was different depending on how big the group was. If there were a lot of people having a good time, then he would have an insanely good time, she says, but when there were only a few people around, he was very quiet. He would rationally analyse things and teach you things you didn't know, like how to be a good person. But he was very masculine, extremely manly. No matter what he said, he was very definite about it. So he was a very good person, and he taught people how to be a good person. Yeah, keep that in mind. While there was a real attraction between Bruce and Amy, their relationship didn't become too serious. As a teenager, Bruce seemed to have an ironic wariness of romantic attachments. When he was 15, he wrote this playful poem about love and relationships. If any one of the young women in his life could be considered Bruce's high school sweetheart, it was Pearl So. She was the one real romance of his youth, says Robert Lee. Pearl's family and Bruce's were extremely close. Her dad was a friend of their fathers from the stage, he says. Pearl's mum, Eva So, was really close with their mum, just like sisters. She came over to our house, or their house, every day just to hang out. Bruce called Eva Auntie So, and treated her like a second mother, etc, etc. Bruce took to dancing. He frequently visited Pearl's home after school to practice, and so forth. Here's a piece on how passionate he was or serious about cha-cha. A Philippine woman who owned a dance studio in Tsim Sha Tsui. He picked it up from her, looks of it. As part of his homework, he kept a personal note of cha-cha fancy steps that numbered over 100, including moves like banana boat and rubbing and double, etc, etc. And he invented his own steps. Turned his obsession into a contest. That's his competitive character. Okay, what's this? More information about his movie. About a movie. His father had a drug addiction, opium. Small pieces of cooked opium. Hui Chun detox at home using the time-honoured Chinese method, taping off his drug consumption by drinking rice wine spiked with small pieces of cooked opium for a week before finally quitting cold turkey. It was very difficult for him to stop. Phoebe recalls he had diarrhea often. Wow. After this brutal ordeal, Hui Chun never touched opium again. Having dealt with the father's drug addiction, the family turned to confront Bruce's problems with violence. He'd come up with a new way to start fights and test out his Wing Chun. Ever the actor, he would dress up in traditional Chinese costume, mandarin collar, flowing robe, etc., and wander the streets with everyone else in Western style clothing. Yeah, read about that. And then he'd like, what are you looking at? You know, do I look weird or something? And have a fight, you know. He used to was punching dummies and so forth. Okay. Bruce didn't want to leave his friends and family. It felt like punishment, like he was being sent away, cast off. He was being sent to America by his family, right? His father, mother. Bruce didn't want to go, but his father forced him, says Hawkins. Is that Hawkins Chun? Bruce feared his father and had to comply. Phoebe says Dad's intuition was to let him eat bitter or suffer in the USA. Getting into trouble and all that sort of stuff, so he'd be set there to suffer, right? Okay, something about he was studying medicine or pharmacy or whatever he's got to do, become a dentist. Bruce decided it would be useful to pick up a flashy kung fu style to impress potential American students. One of his father's close friends, Master Xu Hongsang, was an expert in northern kung fu, known for its acrobatic leaps and high kicks. Bruce learned northern style for showmanship, says Hawkins. The deal was Master Sang would teach Bruce his fancy forms in return for Bruce instructing him in cha-cha. Bruce went to Master Sang's kung fu club every morning at 7 a.m. for 2 months to exchange lessons. Master Sang later jokingly complained it turned out to be a bad deal for him. Bruce was such a fast learner, he mastered the movements of several complex forms, while Master Sang never quite got the hang of the basic cha-cha steps. Worked out more for Bruce, right? Okay, and it's a stage where Bruce becomes transformed from a teenage punk into a more mature and sober young man. Okay, and he suddenly changed, calmed down, all that sort of stuff. This is Bruce's college essay. About 4 years of hard training in the art of Kung Fu, began to understand and felt the principles of gentleness, the art of neutralizing the effect of the opponent's effort, etc., etc. That's when he started to calm down.